This is Horror Podcast.
Welcome to This is Horror, a podcast for readers, writers, and creators. I'm Michael David Wilson, and every episode alongside my co-host Bob Pastorella, we chat with the world's best writers about writing, life lessons, creativity, and much more. Happy New Year! This is the 13th year of This is Horror Podcast, and we are just a few episodes away from episode 600. I am hoping that this is going to be a lucky 13 for us, but we will find out in due course. But whilst many things have changed over the last 13 years for This is Horror Podcast, one thing has not changed. And that is that we love talking to David Moody. He first joined us for episode 2 of the podcast. And in fact, he spoke to me prior to that for Scream Magazine. I think that was in about 2011. So today we are back with David Moody to talk about his fantastic book, Shadowlocked, one of the best releases of 2024. It's a great conversation, as it always is with David. But before we jump into it, a quick advert break.
In 1867, the young Samantha Gray marries the infamous Captain Jakes, unleashing a series of brutal horrors in this epic splatter western from Death's Head Press. Mayhem Sam by J.D. Grace is a rip-roaring tall tale of revenge, drags a coffin full of gold across the hellscape of Reconstruction, Texas, and explodes at the top of a mountain. You better read this one with the lights on.
Coming in 2025 from I Write at Night Indie Horror Press, Royal Jelly by R.C. Housen. Ruby the Raven was once a fighter with a promising future. Then a brutal injury ended her career. After years of opiates and surgery, she's ready to move forward with her life. She's taken a new job, and while the salary is beyond her wildest dreams, the truths she will uncover are beyond her darkest nightmares. Will Ruby make it out of the building alive, or will the secrets that ooze beneath consume her completely? Royal Jelly is the devil's advocate meets phantasm for the 21st century.
Okay, with that said, here it is. It is David Moody on This is Horror. David, welcome back to This is Horror.
Well, thank you for having me again. It's very cool to be back.
Yeah, it's been around a year since I last spoke to you, and that was, of course, for the House of Bad Memories launch, my novel that you were kind enough to blurb. And so I'm wondering, as I always do, what have been the biggest changes for you, both personally and professionally, in that time?
Oh, do you know, I wish there had been some changes, really, because I'm kind of stuck a little bit. That doesn't sound very enticing or exciting for people to listen to, but it's just, I'm just being honest here. I think when we spoke last time, I was telling you about the stuff going on with Hater film-wise that I'm not allowed to say anything about. And, you know, we've spoken by email about this. It's still stuck. And I don't know if it's going to happen or if it's not going to happen. I really don't know, and I can't call it. But, you know, this has been happening for about 15 years, so it's nothing new for me. But the difficulty this time is I feel that I'm at a position where I've got to make a decision and say, right, now, do I just keep holding out for this, or do I just say, screw it, and let's get everything back and go the full independent route again? But until I know one way or another what's happening, I can't do that. When we spoke last year, I think it was either the beginning or the middle of the writer's strike, so that's held everything up a little bit. Had some encouraging news on it earlier in the year, but now it's kind of gone quiet again. So So yeah, I've got that going in the background, which is kind of affecting everything. So in the meantime, I'm just trying to write new stuff, go in different directions, and put different books out just to keep some visibility.
Yeah, and talking of those books, I mean, let's just jump into the book that we particularly want to talk about today, which is your most recent release, and that is, of course, Shadowlocked. So, to begin with, what is the elevator pitch for that story?
Elevator pitch. I am so bad at these things. So this is what I normally tell people, and I think you're supposed to do this really quick and concise, but I can't. So here comes the whole thing. Married couple on their way home from a party late at night. There's an incident on the road. They come off the side of a bridge, end up in a river. The wife dies. The husband escapes. When he wakes up, he tells the police that they were rammed, that somebody forced them off the road. The police say, "Hang on a second, mate. Are you sure you're not still concussed?" Because there were no other vehicles around. So he's trying to work out what happened and why his wife lost control because she was driving, and why they ended up in that situation. And then she reappears in a kind of, is she a ghost? Is she not a ghost? Is it something wrong with his brain? Is this something to do with the occult? But she comes back, and they realise together that until they've sorted out exactly what happened, neither of them are going to move on. There you go.
Yeah, and there's so much that I want to talk about pertaining to Shadowlocked, but I think it would be quite helpful to know what was the genesis for the story. What was the reason that you decided to write it in the first place?
It's a story actually that's been hanging around for, believe it or not, about 30 years, which just shows how old I am now. When I wrote my first book in 1994, I had it released a couple of years later. That was Straight to You, and managed to sign a publishing deal with a very ropey publishing house, but it felt like the real deal at the time. And as that was happening in the background, because the process took about a year, I had this burst of creativity, and I wrote a book that turned into the first autumn novel eventually. I wrote a novel called Trust. And then I wrote this book, and it didn't really have a title, but it was about a guy who was involved in a car crash, and he was sent away to recuperate, and started seeing this ghostly girl who, the more that she was around, the more real she became to him. And the crux of that story was that it was kind of having a relationship with a ghost. And his family was saying, "You're out of your bloody tree." And he was saying, "But no, she's really here." And they have him committed. He's going to be operated on, and he's thinking, "Shit, if I go through this, then I'm going to lose her forever, even though she might not really be there." And he breaks free from hospital, etc., etc. So it was a very different kind of story, and it was quite Boys Own, not Boys Own, the pop band, Boys Own, as in that's it, Bob. That was a kind of a comic for boys back in the day before my time, when it was very gung ho and "I'm a soldier, you're a soldier, let's have a scrap, lads," that kind of thing. It was very much very basic. It had absolutely no depth to it whatsoever. That my first version of this book, because I didn't have any depth to me, because it was before I got married, before I had kids, and I was just some random 20-something bloke with no life experience. So it was entertaining enough, but it never went anywhere. And this kind of, before we started recording, we were having quite an in-depth conversation about kids and ex-partners and so on and so on. But just to tie back to that, even though nobody who's watching this now heard it, another element that happened in those years, those intervening years between me having a first stab at this story and now, was that my wife and I got together, and she went through a very difficult divorce, and I've got step kids, so there were lots of custody battles, and basically the crux of it was the guy. I knew her ex-husband, and the guy that I thought he was, the perfect life that he presented to everybody else, was an absolute crock. And the reality was that he was an absolutely awful person to be around, who was causing a lot of harm to the people closest to him. And it always fascinated me. It was hard going through at the time, particularly for my wife and stepkids, but it always fascinated me looking back at how successfully this guy presented a version of himself to the rest of the world. You know, you think you know somebody, but once that front door's closed, who knows what could be going on back there. So that really was the missing element to the book. It was this relationship that's interrupted, and the more you look into it, the more you see that maybe things weren't as you thought they were. I'm trying here, and I'm saying a lot, I'm probably saying very little with all these words, but I'm trying to skirt around the crux of the book because I don't really want to give too much away.
Yeah, and I think this is a theme that we're going to have throughout this conversation, because in many ways this book is really a book of two parts. I mean, to begin with, it feels like a poignant study of grief and of loss and of mourning and what on earth you do when your whole world has been taken away from you, something that you previously hadn't imagined, and certainly hadn't
Yeah.
imagined at such a young age. But then, in the kind of second half, which you've certainly alluded to, so I don't think it's more of a spoiler than anything we've said.
Yeah.
There's this unraveling, or things are not as they seem, and there's
Mhm.
almost something a little bit Jack Torrance about it. Hang on, do I mean Jack Torrance? Is that the
The
guy from
Shining.
The Shining? Have I said
Yeah,
the
yeah.
right? Okay,
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
yeah.
think so. Yeah.
yeah.
All work and no play.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly. It's early here, as I've said off air, but apparently we're referencing things off air in this conversation too, just to
No
make
holds
things
barred.
interesting for the listeners and the viewers. But yeah, there's almost a mystery element, a breakdown element. Is this the second half? Is anything goes? The first half, you think maybe you've got it figured out to a point, and the more that this book progresses, the more you realize you haven't figured anything out.
Do you know what? It's so cool to hear you say that, and I really appreciate it because it was such a change of direction for me, this book. And I'll be honest, at the moment, the sales haven't been great because I don't know how to push it. I don't know how to promote it because I'm Mr. Zombies End of the World kind of guy, and I've suddenly got this book, and I'm thinking, where does this go? But it's really gratifying to hear you talk about it like that.
It almost feels like an end of the world singular type thing. It's an apocalypse of one person. And I'm trying to avoid spoilers and things like that, but like what Mike was saying, the cracks in the seams are not as apparent until you start going into it. And like what Michael said, the halfway point is a game changer. So you set the hook and you reel us in, but then you're like, oh, I've got an auto reeler. And it's like, whoa, shit, things are crazy in a good way, in a way I couldn't stop turning the pages way. It was great.
Oh, that's so cool. Thank you. So I'm just going to grin through the rest of this now because I've had such little chance to talk about this book with people. So it's brilliant to have the opportunity to big it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's really interesting that Bob says it's an apocalypse of one book, because I was thinking, it's almost the inverse of Hater and the zombie things you've been doing with Autumn, because in that situation, the whole world is fucked, and you as the survivor are the one trying to keep it together and to still live. But in Shadowlocked, the whole world is going on as normal, but you're the one that's fucked. You're the one that has been utterly destroyed. So there's just like a perfect symmetry in you being the one to put out this book.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And I must admit that as I was writing it, I did think it is kind of a solo apocalypse kind of thing, because there's a very definite end to the book. Things aren't gonna go well. Well, if it starts with somebody dying at the bottom of a river, things are never going to go well, are they? But yeah, yeah, no, that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, with the river death at the start, I didn't think it was going to be a feel good. I didn't think this was a nice little cozy or one that would be not directed, but adapted by Hallmark. So yeah. For horror fans and for those who like dark fiction, it meant that I was in safe territory. I think there's almost something comfortable about being uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, and I think just because, and I'm not, no spoilers here again, not because everybody dies at the end or because something horrific happens to the main character at the end, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a sad ending. I mean, I've written books in the past where the entire world dies at the end, and stories where everything goes to hell, everything's destroyed, but the story itself still has a happy ending because your characters maybe get the validation or the justification that they've been looking for through the story rather.
Yeah, and I particularly like with this one as well, which we've alluded to, that at different points in the narrative, you're rooting for different people. And
Mhm.
because everything becomes so confusing, but in a good way, as with any mystery, yeah, you're not sure. Should I be on this person's side? Should I be on that person's side? And then I think it's a great commentary on how, as human beings, we're all flawed. We're all painted in these different colors. There is no black and white. I mean, it should be obvious that there are some characters that you're probably going to like less by the end of it, but
Mhm.
everyone is messed up. Everyone has done things that, weren't necessarily ideal. And that is
Yeah.
a reflection of the reality that we're living in.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great narrative device to use. And I think I stumbled on it by accident when I was writing Hater first time around. When you get to a point and you're assuming it's going to go one way and then it goes in a completely different direction. And I think it's interesting to kind of wrong foot people, get people rooting for the wrong person or rooting in the wrong way for somebody. Do you know what I mean? I've been toying with the idea of writing a book that starts off as three completely separate stories with three main characters that you all root for, and then we get to the midpoint and only one of them can be successful. So two of them are going to have a really shitty ending, because I just think it's really interesting. Life isn't great all the time, you know. When for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, and it's true. The laws of physics apply to the laws of life. I think that if you get something, somebody else has lost something. If you achieve something, somebody else didn't achieve that. And it's a difficult thing that I don't think we talk about enough. So I don't want to get onto politics or anything, particularly not for you, Bob, because it's a difficult week, I know. Um, but it's the same thing with politics. Every decision a politician makes will negatively affect some people, but we don't talk about that. We never mention that. We're never honest about that. And I just think that in when you're writing, when you're writing a story, you can show that and you can look at that, and it's something we don't think about enough, I think.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
rambling now.
no, and it makes sense because as writers, we tend to we want to spin spin our characters in a certain direction, and so which I just generally call just skillful misdirection, and it's when you actually moor that character, when you center them on their actual, where they're at trajectory. That's when suspense happens because the reader doesn't know. They're like, oh shit, they were on a course and they haven't changed course. They're determined their direction. They know that now they're heading south, you know, or whatever. They're gonna do the thing. the thing that they weren't even thinking of. Oh my God, now they're going to do it. And so we tend to spin that. And it's like what you said, in politics, no politician's going to go up there and go, because we're doing this, we're actually going to cause a lot of people to lose their jobs. And so, no one, so it's as writers, we want to be able to make a skillful misdirection. We want to be able to spin positive or negatively to where we get our end result is often the opposite of that, but we have to set the course. And when you do it right, it's like it's just like Reese's Pieces, man. It's so good, But if you screw it up, then it just sounds, it reads like it's inorganic. And I think those things have to be organic in the story.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, and it's it's trying to wrong foot the reader without making it too obvious that you're doing that, without telegraphing it, isn't it? It's a difficult trick. I found with Hater, I've probably talked about this before, but the twist in Hater, which I'm avoiding saying exactly what it is, if there is anybody who hasn't read it yet, or if they ever make that bloody film, that I didn't know about that until I wrote it. I'd planned this book as a very down the line, almost zombie kind of thing, but then I got to a point, I'm writing that scene, and I thought, yeah, I can go that way, but what if? So that it caught me out then. And at the risk of sounding pretentious, it's I think as you're writing, you get to know your characters a bit more. As you go through each draft, you get to think, well, all right, I've created this person, and now I've got to know them. They really wouldn't behave like that. They'd behave like this. So I think there's an element of you being caught out by your own characters. That sounds really wrong, doesn't it? That sounds like I've got a problem. Voices in my head kind of thing.
I think it's something that happens with a lot of us, particularly even though I know both me and you, David, we are planners with our stories, but even though it's planned, it's still anything can go if the character. Yeah, I see what you mean about it sounding like we have a problem. But if the character decides to go in a different direction, then you almost have to remap everything. I suppose, to make a really weird analogy, it's like if you put the route into your sat nav, into your GPS, but then there's traffic, so it reroutes you. So you're still going to
Yeah, no,
get
you're right.
that destination, but you might have to take
Mhm.
this bizarre, circuitous route. And I think we have to trust the characters too, because if we then try and force them into sticking rigidly to the plan, well, it just becomes inauthentic.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's interesting that you talk about us both being planners, and I agree with that. But I really think, just taking this a bit further, that there's no difference between somebody who plans and what's the opposite? Was it pantser or something like that? So seat of your pants writer.
Some people say pantser, yeah.
I don't think there's any difference, because everybody goes from having an idea, thinking, "Oh, I'll write this book," to hopefully eventually getting the book written and having people read it. So I believe there's exactly the same amount of work involved in crafting that story. It's just you do it in different ways. I like to do what you're talking about, Mike, and just I break it down. Well, these are the main beats, these are the chapters, so on and so on. But ultimately, no matter how much planning I do, if I ever look back to those original notes, I think, well, that didn't happen, and I normally get to a point when I'm halfway through a novel, and I'm thinking, I've stopped looking at my reference notes now, and I'm just making it up as I go along. So I think it's a more organic process than we plotters believe it is, I think.
Well, this is why when I was talking to Josh Malaman, I said I suppose I might even call my method the hybrid, because there is a plan, but then I'm allowed to deviate from the plan. So is that really a planner? Because there are some people, particularly if they follow some of these rigid screenwriting books, which I probably don't recommend doing. You could look at them to get a template and to get an idea
Yeah.
as to story, but then you need to, well, deviate from the path. So because we're not doing that, I suppose it's a hybrid between planning and pantsing. But I mean, none of us, like, even if we're a planner, it's not like we open our email and it's like, here's the plan sent from your brain. Like, we all have to pants it to a degree. So
Yeah,
maybe the distinction is that we're just coming up with the story at different stages in the process.
yeah, and that's exactly my point. The fact we have this germ of an idea, and maybe I don't know what you're like, but I usually think of the end first and work my way back, and then we have the end result, and we all go through the same amount of planning and rewriting and drafting and redrafting and spell checking and whatever to get to the end. We just call it different things, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. And related to that, at the moment, me and John Crinan are collaborating on a novel. And it's really interesting because we're both meticulous planners. And so we both know the beginning and the end. But then my typical method to get there is to plan from the front to go to the end. But his method is to go from the end and to work backwards. So in planning, we're almost both crafting this different plan and then comparing and being like, right, how much does this actually resemble
Yeah,
what we discussed? Now we did, to make it easier, we've kind of approached it a little bit like a play. We were like, right, there are 5 acts. This is roughly what we want to have happen in each act. And we did that mostly just through phone calls and conversations. But yeah, now that we're really just jumping into the detail, it's so interesting to see him start from the end and me start from the beginning, which to me feels more logical. But
yeah. Collaborations are really difficult from that perspective, aren't they? If you have a different approach to the planning and plotting process, then it can be hard. I wrote a series of books with Mark Tufo and Chris Philbrook, called the Bleed series, and it was their baby, and they were very kind to invite me to contribute. I was. It's not that I was at odds with the other two. It's just that I did things very differently to the other two, and I naively expected that we'd all work in the same way. So the first book, I we wrote a third each because we were all introducing a set of characters that would all meet up in later books. So that was fine, and then I wrote the start of the second book and said, "There you go, gents," and then it went just all over the place and barely managed to get it back. And then we were getting to the end of the third one. I'm thinking, this is a trilogy. We need to tie up this story and to getting them to the way we thought about things made it very difficult to get to the end. My OCD brain, the only thing I could say was, well, I'll write the last third of the final book so I can wrap it up the way I want to wrap it up. But it's really difficult, and I find it hard collaborating for that reason. I have such a set way of doing things, that it can derail the creative process a bit, can't it? When you're having to adapt to the way that somebody else wants to grow something.
And did they allow you to write the final third? Did you get to end it how you wanted, or were they like, hold on a minute, we've got other ideas?
No, they weren't precious about it at all. It was great. It was, see, the upside of it was that as something to kind of stretch your writing muscles, it was absolutely brilliant because Chris and Mark are both got such very different styles. Mark is almost stream of consciousness stuff, and I struggle sometimes to keep up with it because it's who's this and what's that and where we're going, and now we're on the moon and now somebody's dead and now they're alive again, and it took a lot of time to untangle that all. But then when we got to the end, as I say, we wrote the first book in thirds, but by the second and third books, we collaborated on. So we were all using each other's characters. The characters all get mixed up in time swaps and things like that. So the last book, to finish it off, I knew how I wanted to finish the story, but to finish the story, I had to write in the style of Mark and Chris, and it was a real challenge. But when I look back on it, that was probably my favourite part of the whole process.
Yeah, do you think off the back of this, would you consider collaborating again, or do you think your collaboration days are behind you? I know you said that you found it quite difficult, but I don't know
Yeah.
if you're just like, no,
This
it's solo from here on out.
this is the point when I'm supposed to say, as an artist, I would love to collaborate with more people, but as a real human being and a big introvert here, I'm saying everybody else back off. Just let me get on with it, please.
Yeah, yeah,
I
no, that,
really, I think there's nothing in terms of writing, working. There's nothing I like more than sitting here in my office with nobody disturbing me, music on, just writing a book and just being able to get on with it. But the downside of this, I heard a great quote the other week. I wish I could remember who said it or what exactly it was. I need to look it up. But they said basically writing a novel is like writing a joke and waiting 2 years to see if it's funny.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, you
I
get
totally get that.
That is so apropos. Yeah.
and I've made mistakes in the past. I'm sure we've all got. I was going to say skeletons in the closet, but manuscripts on the shelves behind that you think nobody's ever going to see that, or maybe I'll dust it off in about 20 years' time or whatever. But it's so easy to go down a path and think this is the one, this is great, this is a brilliant story, and then you hand it over to somebody to read, and they say, "Yeah, it's not all that." I guess that's where beta readers and advanced copies and I don't know, sending a proposal to your agent before you start work, all sensible things like that come in.
Yeah, yeah. I thought I was going to take this in one direction, but then your comment about beta readers at the end. So now I want to know, I mean, how often have you been in a situation where you've got different beta readers saying a completely different thing and they're both as adamant and strong about it? And then how do you decide what you're going to do with the story? And equally related to that, I mean, how much consideration do you give the beta reader feedback anyway? Because sometimes you'll get a comment and you'll think, well, that's totally not what I'm trying to do here. So I see what you're saying, but if I implement that,
Yeah.
it's a different story.
Yeah. But then I guess you have to take a step back, don't you, and say, okay, you haven't got what I'm trying to get you to get from this book. So why is that? Have I not laid the breadcrumbs in the right way? Have I not given you the clues? So I take it's the same with bad reviews, and I've had plenty of those in my time. You take them all on board. I think you've got to read them all, not react to them, but think, well, why are you saying that? What is it about the story that's made you say that? Fortunately, I've not had much in the way of conflict between one group of beta readers saying one thing and one group saying something else. Fortunately, in my experience, a lot of them say the same thing. And there was quite a lot came through with Shadowlocked, some of the subsidiary characters. Well, why did he do that with her, and why did they do that with him? Because it just, they're highlighting things that kind of that were jarring and maybe stuck out for them a little bit. So that was great. And I've just had comments back on hopefully my next book, which will maybe out next year. And there were a few people that said, well, okay, well, his missus is a bit hard on him at the start. And then he makes a sudden change with the missus at the end. And it's just little things like that about relationships. Not necessarily the nuts and bolts of the novel, but just the little details that combine to drive the story forward is what I've found people often pick up on.
Yeah, I know that we both share Dan Howarth as a beta reader. Saying we share him, it sounds like some sort of custodial agreement.
Good old
It's
Dan.
not
Yeah, I have him
not
every other
worked out
weekend.
that way.
I
Yeah,
had signed up for Dan, but you beat me to him, David. So
I,
There's
I
only so
know.
much Howarth you can share
yeah,
around.
exactly.
Yeah, but he is so good at picking up on like relationships and like the dynamic, specifically between couples. So if I've ever got any balance wrong, he will make his comments. So when you were saying, oh, there's been some comments about the couple, I was like, well, you've
Do you
got
know
Dan
what?
Howarth, so
No word of a lie. It was Dan.
There you
He
go. I knew it. I knew
genuinely.
it. It was such a
But it
Dan
was so
comment.
yeah, but it was so useful because in the next book, the relationship that the guy has, the place that he's at in his life, and the effect that that's had on his relationship is key to him doing the things that he does. And so, if that wasn't right, if a reader wasn't buying into that, then the whole book would unravel because you wouldn't be able to believe in the character that you're following every single second of the way, literally, in this book. So it was crucial, and I'm very grateful to Dan for pointing that out. He wasn't alone, but it was specifically Dan I was thinking about on that occasion.
Yeah, who, by the way, recently put out Last Night of Freedom, which I'm reading at the moment, and is absolutely fantastic. But it is one of the best books that I've read this year. I almost can't believe how good it is. So there's a little plug for Last Night of Freedom by Dan Howarth in the middle of our podcast review.
And I would definitely second that because I loved it. It's an absolutely cracking book. Really enjoyed it. It's I don't know how to describe it. I won't say too much other than read it.
Yeah, I mean, The Ritual meets The Hangover in backwoods Britain. How's that?
Yeah, no, that'll do it. Yeah, I was thinking a bit of Deliverance as well.
Yeah, always good to have a splash of deliverance in any story,
Yeah,
so that'll do
there's
too.
no dueling banjos, but yeah, there's a lot of deliverance in there.
Yeah.
I got it on my TBR, and now it's just moved up. So yeah, the deliverance
Definitely
thing
recommend.
is that's such a classic.
It'll move up even quicker when I tell you that he's coming on the podcast quite soon. So there's
Well,
some
yeah, I need
breaking
to go
news.
ahead and read it. Then you put him on the schedule. Never mind. But going back to the beta readers, I would feel that when you have a comment from readers about characters and character motivation, that's probably a lot more difficult to implement than if you're going to have something developmental. In other words, like plot wise. I think that hey, I've got a problem with the plot, and if multiple people who have read agree, then yeah, that's you take your big tools out and you go and you fix it. But if you got a problem with the character motivation or something like that, or a relationship dynamic that isn't working, to me, I feel like that is. I'm not saying it's a crushing blow, but it would be. It would be, oh shit, I got to rework so much, because so much relies on character and character motivation and dynamics, and you can't force that shit. It has to be organic. And so that's, I don't know. I'm just making a comment. I think that would be just, the it would, you'd have to pull your britches up and get to work type stuff, on those.
I do agree with you to an extent, but also I think that the characters and their interactions is just another one of your nuts and bolts. So I think I don't think it's any harder or easier to deal with than a plot issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me with this book in particular, I mean everything that the beta readers got about the relationship between these two characters, they got from what I told them and the way that I told it. And so looking at it, there wasn't anything really in the relationship itself that I needed to change, but it was the interactions. It was kind of softening of the dialogue. It was perhaps the point where the guy's partner jumps down his throat because she realizes he's done something ridiculously stupid. It was maybe moving that a little bit. So I didn't find it was on this occasion particularly onerous, but it was hugely important because, as I say, you've got to believe that this guy is doing what he's doing with the best of intentions, and the way that I'd originally written it, I think he would have been quite justified to say, oh, if you're going to talk to me like that, sod it, I'm not going to bother, and just end the book halfway through with him saying, forget it, I'm going home. Or not going home, because that's where she is.
Right.
I mean, you make some bold moves with your fiction, but that would be one hell of a bold move if you're like, right,
What, I
he's
just stop the
gone,
book halfway
he's
through?
left, and then it ends.
Yeah.
It seems like the kind of thing Chuck Palahniuk would do because he doesn't give a damn about conventional rules.
I think there's a lot. Yeah, it wouldn't work in terms of a novel, but I think it's really interesting. I think major character deaths are about as close as you can get, and I love to build up with somebody and really invest in somebody, and then just casually kill them. I think I did that back with one of the early Autumn books. I think it was Purification. And I'd got this guy, he was a university lecturer, and he was kind of like father to a group of survivors, and they were all relying on him. And he just gets caught in some crossfire. Oh, where's Bernard? Oh, he's dead. And really, the impact of that for the remaining characters was huge. And I think that that in dying like that, he probably cemented his place in the story more than he would have done had he just carried on as a normal survivor and made it through to the end.
Yeah, I feel that surprisingly in horror, in horror fiction, I should say, we don't always see or often see main characters dying halfway through. Like most of them do get to the end, or they die in the final act.
Yeah, no, you're right. My theory is that a good story is just following somebody, and it's a succession of things going wrong for them. But to kill them off is the ultimate thing going wrong, isn't it? So that would kill the story. So we have to keep them going to an extent. But then you could kill them off and have another main character, can't you? Kind of, if you've built it up properly.
Yeah.
I just think it's an interesting thing to do to get your readers to invest 100% into this person, because people just make the assumption, well, this is our main character, this is our square-jawed hero, he's going to make it to the end, he's going to be the one that saves the day. Oh shit, he's dead. They'll remember the book, I'm sure.
It's just that reminds me. I don't know if you've ever seen Beer Fest, but I can't remember the group who does it. The same guys that did Super Troopers. One of the characters, Landfill, he dies mid movie. The evil beer drinking brothers kill him, and it's a sad moment because his character was crucial to them actually going to tournament and winning. But lo and behold, Landfill had a cousin who looks and sounds exactly like Landfill because he is the same actor, and even says, "Hey, y'all can just call me Landfill too," as a tribute. And so it's like, okay, so you brought us down, and then you lifted us back up even higher. Because it's not the same character, but it's the same actor, and it's just like, I'd love to see something like that in a horror movie. It had to be, or a horror book and, a story, but there'd have to be like some type of element, like people could come back type thing. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
that, to me, that would be like the only way. You get this guy and, you get him invested. You're in there for about 4 or 5 chapters, kill him. And then 2 chapters later, he's back, but it's not actually him. It's just some guy who looks just like him. We should do that.
Or just have the wife die at the bottom of the river and then come back to work out with her husband why she's died.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
That's not me crowbarring us back to Shadowlocked. It really isn't.
There was no crowbar there. It worked perfect.
Oh, I was gonna segue us back in a minute, but I will say with Beer Fest to somehow bring us away from Shadowlocked as quick as we got there. That is one of the dumbest sounding things I have ever heard in a movie, and I now completely want to watch it. That sounds like, the kind of thing that would inspire my more comedic moments, like in Daddy's Voice. And now we're referencing books that I've written that only you two have read, and that hasn't even been officially announced yet. But that's the kind of podcast it apparently is today.
Yeah.
Anyway,
You
back
should
to
watch Beer
Shadowlocked.
Fest.
No, not Beer Fest. We're getting away from that. Now I
So what
will
we're going to
watch
have,
it.
Daddy's Other Boy or Uncle's Boy? Is that the next one?
Oh, Uncle's Boy sounds all
Uncle's
sorts of
Boy.
wrong. Oh my goodness.
Sorry, yeah, back to Shadowlock. Come on, this is important.
So, of course, you said at the start of the conversation that this is an idea that you had for 30 years, which is really interesting because in many ways this feels so kind of timely and like the kind of story that you couldn't have written at any other point in your life. And I mean, particularly at the start when the protagonist, Adam, is ruminating on loss and grief and death. I mean, I know because we spoke about it last time, you had a heart attack, which had obviously brought, the idea of mortality closer to home for you. So I wondered, was in fact the heart attack something that I don't want to use the word inspired, but was this an impetus for you to write this book and to explore mortality
Yeah.
and losing a loved one?
I think it was, yeah, and I think it's something that comes up a lot in the fiction that I've been writing. It's it was next April. It'll be 5 years, believe it or not, since it happened, and it it's increasingly playing havoc with my mind. I find it really hard to deal with sometimes how close I got to dying. When it first happened, it was the biggest impact. I thought I got away with it really, really lightly in the end. There was only a very small amount of damage to my heart. I was able to carry on doing everything that I had been doing. I used to run races, but I've been banned from that now. But I do still run a few times a week. So to all intents and purposes, I thought, oh, that was a close shave. I got away with it there. But it was only afterwards when I researched it a bit more and when I've heard other stories, you realise, oh shit, that really was close. And I am fit. I was fit. There was absolutely no indication that it was going to happen. And I still, to this day, find that absolutely terrifying. To the point where recently, I'll be honest, it's affected me quite substantially. It's affected my mental health quite a bit because if anything happens now, and I'm thinking it was caused, I went back to work, stepped away from writing for a bit, and it was caused, I believe, by an issue that I was trying to resolve. That I had a member of staff who was assaulted by another member of staff, and when you in the corporate world, I think the one thing that's easy to forget, but you need to remember, is that the HR department works for the company, not for the staff. So I'm trying to sort this out, and there were loads of people trying to get involved as well. And basically the senior management screwed up dealing with it all, and it went shit shaped. And kind of to dig themselves out of a hole, the company decided, oh well, let's blame him. So it was something that I'd done apparently. And I had a phone call with HR first thing in the morning, and they were saying, well, you've done this and you said that. And I knew I hadn't because I'd recorded the conversation and I could go back and think, but there were two of them and there was only one of me. And I thought, I know where this is going. So I went on a running machine, ran, and then had a heart attack, came off and had a heart attack. And it absolutely terrifies me now to think that if something else stressful like that happened, well, what would the response be? There's no reason to think. I've been checked out. I was checked out this summer a couple of times, and there's nothing wrong with my heart. I'm fit and healthy, but it happened before. And once you've had that chink in your armor, you're thinking, could that happen again? And it's quite difficult. And I will admit that I do use that a lot in writing now, and I find that yeah, I could, obviously, the more you experience in life, the more you can put into your books, and that one has had a profound impact on me. It's yeah, I think it's changed everything for me. Oh, it's gone really dark, hasn't it? Suddenly, should we talk about Beer Fest again or something?
Well, I was going to continue along the lines of what you were just talking about. And I mean, what kind of things have you had to implement in terms of your lifestyle? And I mean, I'm also wondering, how this has affected the writing as a whole, because when we have things, happen that bring us closer to death or that reveal our mortality, it can make us put things in different perspectives. So I could imagine for some people, it could make the writing more important because they got so many stories, and it really highlights the finite time we have. But then for others, it could go the other way because it's like, well, yeah, I love the writing and I love the storytelling, but there are all sorts of other more important things in my life, such as my family and my loved ones. And
Yeah,
so, I mean, what did that do to your mindset?
I think it's a little bit of all of those things. I think definitely the family thing now, and it happened at the beginning of the pandemic, and since we've come out of that, Lisa and I have travelled a lot, and I just want to keep travelling. The more of the world I can see, the better. Whenever you go anywhere, completely different. And it was a year ago today that we flew to Japan for a couple of weeks there, and it's just the most incredible experience. And it just makes me want to do that a lot more. So yeah, being with my family is more precious than it ever was, because I felt incredibly guilty after it had just happened because of the impact it had on my wife and the two youngest daughters, to be honest, because they were in the house at the time, and their last, what they thought might be their last memory of me was watching my feet disappear into the back of the ambulance, and they were thinking, oh, we don't want that to be the last thing we saw of Dad. But yeah, it had a huge impact on them, far greater impact on them initially than it did on me. So yeah, that's the most important change, I think. But in terms of writing, you touched on something there about wanting to get more stuff out, and I actually did that last year, early last year. I've got this ideas document, and I have it on my computer, I have it on my iPad, I have it on my phone, and I can access it at any time. And when inspiration strikes, because it never strikes when you're sat at your desk when you're supposed to be doing something, it's always when you're in the shops or working or in the pub or whatever. But I have this thing there, so I can just write it down. Somebody says something interesting, somebody triggers an idea, I just pop it down. So I looked at this and I thought, well, okay, so if it takes me at best maybe 3 to 6 months to write a book, let's say 6 months. So how many ideas have I got here? And I worked out that I've got 2 centuries worth of ideas. And you think, shit, I'm never going to be able to do anything with that. So I went through a phase last year where every month I just grab a random one of those ideas and just bang out a short story and put it on my website. And that was absolutely brilliant. That was so invigorating in terms of writing because you're not focused on this one big project all year. I was still focused on a big project all year, but also I could just dip in and out and write in these different voices and different situations. And I think it's really healthy to have a good mix of things going on when you're a writer. So I think, did I answer your question? And I seem to be rambling a lot this morning.
Yeah, you certainly answered the part about, the mindset to writing. And then, because for some reason, as I am wont to do, I combined two completely different questions. The other was, I mean, in terms of the heart attack, you said that it happened after you had the thing with HR and you had the phone call, and then you went on the running machine.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've gone from obviously running in competitions to now just running presumably shorter distances a couple of times a week. So when you initially had the examination, I mean, was there something that all the kind of long distance running had? Was there a problem with the heart's condition? You said your heart is healthy now. I mean, the idea that you just got stressed, jumped on a running machine, and then that triggered it is terrifying. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as that, but I wondered,
Yeah.
what was there a kind of health issue that was underlying, and then you've made these changes to make sure that doesn't happen again, or
Yeah. There was some clogging in one of my arteries, because that's what it is, isn't it? It's an artery getting blocked. That's a heart attack. And yeah, since there has been a change of diet and a change of various other things and medication that ensures that hopefully that won't happen again. But both my parents died of heart disease, so it's also something that I've inherited a propensity for from them. But still, at the age of, I think I was 49 at the time, I wouldn't, if I'd had to bet on what was going to finish me off, I wouldn't have put a heart attack at the age of 49. It's just, it did come out of the blue, and that's what I struggle with more and more now. I think the more time passes since it happened, whenever there's anything difficult to deal with at home, if there are any issues, if I'm concerned about something, my brain goes into override and starts thinking, oh shit, is this going to cause a heart attack? Is it going to happen again? It's it's the unexpected side effects that have really caught me out.
And then do you go for checkups to kind of monitor, kind of regular, or as regular as the NHS will allow these days
Well, well,
basis?
well, well, that's the thing, and I think that's what had particularly played on my mind this year, because it was coming up to a 5-year anniversary, and I'd never seen a doctor about my heart. It was all done on the telephone initially through the pandemic. Once I was discharged from hospital, all the follow-up appointments were done on the phone, and I'd never sat down. So I just went to the GP and said, "Please, can you just give me some reassurance and just check everything out?" And they did. And I went to hospital and got checked out, and they given a clean bill of health. But I think it's the chink in the armor. That's what I'm getting at, because until that point, I was, that's the guy that guy there runs half marathons and he does this and he does that, and I felt not invincible, but pretty good. And it really, it's a massive blow when you realize you're not. And I'm like mid-50s now, and it's always there. The thought that you're getting older and that any day could be your last. And I know I've been writing apocalyptic shit for years, but it's still, it weighs on your mind, to the point where earlier on in this conversation, I said something about, in 20 years' time. And whenever I say 20 years' time now, I'm thinking, shit, I'll be 73. That's ridiculous. But 20 years ago feels like 5 minutes ago. I think this is going to sound really pretentious and wanky. I'm sorry, but I think I'm fortunate that I write, because you can take this stuff and channel it a little bit and put it into your books. So going back to your earlier question, Michael, there's definitely, I'm not saying that every book is going to have somebody who has a heart attack, but definitely the feelings that I had, the emotions I had, are informing the things that I do. And I think a good case in point are the hospital scenes at the beginning of Shadowlocked. So yeah, of course, it's a grim conversation, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's a conversation consistent with the
With our
conversations that
usual
we've had
conversations. Yeah.
over the past decade, which is also ridiculous, thinking about how quickly time passes, to continue that theme. That
Yeah,
we have known
100%.
each other for well over a decade now. You can't even just say a decade. It is.
No, it's got to be. It's close to 15 years, isn't it, since that first
Mm-hmm.
night when we met in that pub in Coventry and talked
Yeah.
about Hater.
Yeah, we should have known that everything would be pretty grim. meeting up at a pub in Coventry is not the start of like a wonderful, positive chapter in your life. I mean, it's got pretty bad if you've even stepped into Coventry to begin with. I mean, something has gone wrong there.
Well, yeah, I don't mind that. Coventry's all right. Yeah. It's no kiddie, is it?
Oh my goodness, it is no kiddie. Which I'm trying with my fiction to slowly get Kidderminster on the map. I'm not sure if the mayor of Kidderminster would be terrifically happy with my promotional efforts. I don't often say a lot positive about it, but getting it into some stories.
Yeah, Kidderminster's about 20 minutes from here, and my car I came from a garage in Kidderminster, so I take it there once a year and usually wait for it. I can't be bothered to come home and go back again. And like last couple of years, I've been walking around Kidderminster for half a day, and there's some canals and there are restaurants and everything. I'm thinking, why has he got such a downer on Kidderminster? It's all right.
Yeah, just just my childhood and some unfortunate events. But honestly,
Yeah.
I didn't think you were gonna conclude that it was all right. I mean, last time I was in Kidderminster, this has now turned into the This is Kidderminster podcast. I was walking through the town centre, and in fact, this does come into to Daddy's Boy again, not released, not announced yet. So great reference, but it just does feel like the high street of broken dreams. I used a very similar phrase because you've got so many shops that are just boarded up. You used to be a retail paradise with Tandy and Woolworths and Index, and it's all gone to shit now. But it is not just Kidderminster. This is,
Yeah.
I guess, like the kind of Midlands and Northern landscape where there's less money being put into these smaller towns, and there's a lot more kind of internet shopping now, so you just have these areas that used to be burgeoning areas of commerce and retail, and they're just nothing.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's not Kidderminster specific. It is something that's happened to the UK over the last decade and a bit. 14 years perhaps is the measure that we often talk about, because that's when the Tories came in. And yeah, it is sad. Everywhere's lost their Tandy and their Woolworths and their British Home Stores and their Wilko. And Bob's thinking, what the hell are they talking about?
No,
Yeah.
I'm not, because I see it I see a direct reflection of that right across the street from where I work.
Mhm.
We have a mall that was 15 years ago, as late as 15 years ago, was thriving, and now ever since something happened, and it's someone who works there. They work in security. They're one of my customers. They said, hey, they're gonna redo the air conditioning at the mall. They're going to have to, because they're going to have helicopters bringing in stuff to all the air conditioning's on the ceiling, on the roof. They're going to be bringing in equipment, stuff like that, and they're going to have to close the mall. And I'm like, well, that ain't no big loss. They only got like 3 stores in there anyway. This mall will hold 100 stores, so there are only like maybe 3 big stores there now. There's maybe a handful of other stores, and for me to even say, well, that ain't no big deal, it's almost like saying, kind of kicking it to the side, it's abandoned. But yeah, it's like something's what you're talking about 15 years ago. It's like it's worldwide.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's. I think it all goes back to greed, but that's just me. Someone's making money off someone.
Yeah. It does always go down to greed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think first thing we need to do is outlaw billionaires, but that's a whole different story.
Yes, we should.
Thank you so much for listening to David Moody on This Is Horror podcast. Join us again next time for the second and final part of the conversation. Bye. But if you would like that ahead of the crowd, if you would like every episode ahead of the crowd, then become our patron at patreon.com/thisishorror. Not only do you get early bird access to each and every episode, but you can submit questions to the interviewee. And the first two people that we will be talking to this year are Eric LaRocca, who is going to be imminently releasing a new novella, and Richard Chismar, who at the end of last year released the book Memorials. We are talking to them both this coming weekend. So if you're listening to this at the time of release, then there is time to get those questions in. But do be quick about it. And I am hoping that this year we can get to 150 patrons. But I need your help to do that. That is a goal that is not just contingent on me, but on you. So if you have the financial means and you can help us get to that milestone, please do consider going to patreon.com/thisishorror and pledging your support today. If it looks like a good fit for you, I would love for you to join us. Okay, before I wrap up, a quick advert break.
Coming in 2025 from I Write at Night Indie Horror Press, Royal Jelly by R.C. Housen. Ruby the Raven was once a fighter with a promising future. Then a brutal injury ended her career. After years of opiates and surgery, she's ready to move forward with her life. She's taken a new job, and while the salary is beyond her wildest dreams, the truths she will uncover are beyond her darkest nightmares. Will Ruby make it out of the building alive, or will the secrets that ooze beneath consume her completely? Royal Jelly is the devil's advocate meets phantasm for the 21st century.
In 1867, the young Samantha Gray marries the infamous Captain Jakes, unleashing a series of brutal horrors in this epic splatter western from Death's Head Press. Mayhem Sam by J.D. Grays is a rip-roaring tall tale of revenge, drags a coffin full of gold across the hellscape of Reconstruction, Texas, and explodes at the top of a mountain. You better read this one with the lights on.
Now, another thing that I am doing this year is looking for my 1,000 true fans. And that is pertaining to my fiction. So I know some of you just know me from the podcast, but I am also an author. I have got a number of books out. The Girl in the Video, They're Watching, co-written with Bob Pastorella, House of Bad Memories, and coming later this year, Daddy's Boy. And goodness, I can't wait to unveil the cover art for Daddy's Boy. I'm working with Vinnie Chong again, and he has done such a remarkable job. That will be coming up very shortly on the This Is Horror website. But in terms of my pursuit for my true fans, I'm looking for the people that always want to read a Michael David Wilson title, because I'm absolutely convinced that there are 1,000 of you out there. The trick is, of course, finding you. So if you think you are a true fan of my work, send me an email, mdwtruefan. Email me michael@thisishorror.co.uk and let me know. And I will be compiling a mailing list specifically for those 1,000 true fans. There will be special offers. There will be exclusive news. I just want to find a place to be able to connect with everyone about my fiction. So again, much like Patreon, I thank you in advance for getting in contact and supporting me. Now, to end the episode, I would like to leave you with a koan to ponder. Just as the strongest man cannot lift his own legs, the sharpest mind cannot extinguish its own thoughts. I'll see you in the next episode for the second and final part of the conversation with David Moody. But until then, take care of yourselves, be good to one another, read horror, keep on writing, and have a great, great day.
This is Horror Podcast.